Hello, Essex. My name's Ben Miller. So my talk's Why You're Missing Out on Tomorrow's Talent. So this is a presentation about people and about our future. And in being human, being a person is quite difficult. We don't get to choose our genes, our family, our postcode, our childhood experiences, the environment or cultural time that we're born into. Um, but we do have opportunities to shape what comes next. And I don't come with answers. I come with provocations and ideas for where we go next. But I sense that actually there's a lot of people that are after something different, after something better. And so this is really just to stimulate some ideas about what we can do as business leaders in the region. So tune in. So you're listening to me. I can't see you, but I presume there's people there. But just a question for you: What do you look out for when you are listening to a speaker or going to an event? Are you interested in what I do or they do? To maybe look at seniority, credibility, and whether perhaps I could be useful. What about everything else? Perhaps who I am. So all of the things which shape me as a person, my values, my relationships, my experiences, my outlooks, my beliefs, all of the other things which are incredibly important too. And what if I was to say to you that I live with ADHD and I put that perhaps on a CV? What would you think? What would be the thing which perhaps society has trained you to think about what that actually means? ADHD is one of 297 conditions. So do people have the pathology or does society have the pathology, the ideas which we think about people and what's wrong and what's normal? None of us were trained or none of us were created to live in this modern life, and this modern life is quite frenetic. It's indoor, it's sedentary, and it's fairly lonely. But some have adjusted to this, and me with ADHD, I struggle with it, but I think I'm okay with that. We kind of normalize something else as well, which I find slightly strange, that we drug and perhaps design kids to sit down in school, but then at the same time encourage them to get up and not be sedentary in other contexts. And we also have an obesity epidemic as well. So there's this kind of contrast really between doing one thing and then saying another. And I think that our busyness in our lives actually prevents us from standing back and actually seeing how these lines are blurring, because there is a subtle difference between designing and raising kids, but also managing and leading people. And we interchange them, but actually they are very, very different. So quick bit about Latitude Project. So this was one of my things which I do. It was formed during the pandemic. And it's really just an opportunity to explore what we can do better using social design. So we want to use our shared social problems as opportunities to experiment, to learn and transform together. Rather than kind of fixing and designing people, we want to basically create better conditions for more people to thrive. And so we think about the whole social world, all aspects of it, which is really people, things, environments, organizations, and systems, because all of these kind of shape and incentivize how we interact and behave with one another. And we have an approach called, which we call Renegade, which is really, how can we flip things on its head? How can we look in different places? How can we put people first, not the system? How can we focus on the marginalized, not the privileged? How can we move away from managing needs to creating assets? And how do we kind of stop seeing everybody as opportunities to compete with? How do we embrace win-win opportunities? So before we get into these 5 provocations, I want us to just basically think about how we approach problems. There's lots of problems out there which we basically rush into with our hammer. You know, if we have a hammer in our nails, we kind of see everything as a nail to kind of whack with, and maybe that's not the right thing to do, because the problems seem to be getting worse and worse. So, you know, if we stood back and asked, yeah, are we getting healthier? Are we getting wealthier? Are we getting more secure? Are we getting happier, more hopeful about the future? And if we're not, what is all of this for? And so we think, rather than thinking about the kind of world out there, the problems out there, actually a lot of it is linked to human behavior and perception gaps, our kind of inability to understand complex, interconnected problems. And so we kind of think about, actually, it's important to look beneath the surface. You know, 90% of what goes on in our world is unconscious, it's hidden, it's invisible. And actually, how do we get better at making this world visible? So we have mental models and habits, things which we just do, you know, automatically, and mental models being how we understand subjects in the world around us. And then there's the deeper thing, which is really all about our unconscious realm, which is our perspectives. And these underpin literally everything that we do, all of the choices we make, you know, our view of who we are as people, what society is for, the work which we do and enjoy, and everything. And so actually understanding these perspectives are incredibly important before we charge in with our hammer. So before we get to provocation number one, you know, all of our time, all of our energy, everything that we do, a lot of it bad, frankly, is to do with growth, the needing to just grow some more. And so basically it feels like we're pushing up a harder and harder steep, or steeper and steeper hill. And actually it's not going to get any less steep, perhaps, unless we do something different. So these provocations really are just a way of, you know, do we continue pushing harder up this steep hill, or do we try and cross valleys to explore new problems to solve, or new games to play potentially? So provocation number one, is it time to play a new game? And so when I say a new game, basically I mean the game of more. You know, everything is about more. And so thinking about our kind of context where we are, so human history was pretty much can be described as, what we had was, you know, it was difficult to find enough materials to survive comfortably, but we had a fairly stable technology environment pretty much all the time, really, from, you know, fire and tools to maybe kind of even the printing press or kind of steam engines. Things started then kind of speeding up, but even so, these took generations to change. And we also had an empty planet, so we had a kind of resources all over the planet, you know, including fossil fuels and oil and other things, where actually, if we flip that to humans today, we have abundance. We have the potential abundance for well-being and enough stuff to go around. But technology's also changed, so we've just got constant change with all sorts of different technologies which threaten to overwhelm us. And at the same time, we've also got a full planet. So if you're watching this, you're probably classed as an average Westerner. And if everybody lived like an average Westerner, we would need one more planet. So the kind of the new game, basically the kind of numbers are just not really stacking up, and what we're doing just isn't really stacking up. So if we think about the 20th century game, it was really just endlessly pursuing infinite growth. And whilst we were doing it before, the 20th century basically accelerated it, particularly post Second World War. And so we've just basically got this game with no breaks that we're all plugged into, which is kind of destroying us all. And our roles have been reduced to producers and consumers of stuff. And that's who we are. But is that really who we are? What about if we kind of flip this framing of the game in 21st century to being about how do we survive this pursuit from the 20th century? How do we actually survive and thrive? And think about, rather than maybe infinite growth, actually maybe less is more. And actually maybe we need to think about, quality and meaning and less waste and more repairing, the more circular economy. Or maybe there's growth in other ways, maybe psychological and personal growth. But we need to be a bit more flexible, and we need to try and find new games to explore. So I think provocation really is, you might be missing out on tomorrow's talent, because basically tomorrow's talent are wanting to play this new game. So they're wanting to play what comes next. What comes next, well, there's all sorts of different roles. It's not just producers and consumers, it's the entirety of the human experience. It's parents, it's carers, it's citizens, it's creators, it's artists, it's everybody. We need everybody, rather than just simply who can sell us stuff and the ability to consume more stuff. And we also need nature as well. And I think that that's a partnership rather than us versus them. So we have a new game to play, but I think that also a new game requires new players, but new players require a new way to play. And so what do I mean by weird? It's actually a term coined by a Harvard professor called Joe Henrich. And weird stands for Western educated, industrialized, rich and democratic. And his paper was really about, his paper in 2010 was like how the West became psychologically peculiar and particularly prosperous. And his hypothesis was that our culture, our Western culture, is different to anything which came before, but it's also different to almost all cultures on the planet. And the weird thing is that we're only 12% of the population, but 96% of the psychological research done on people was done on weird people, so Western people. So our perception of how other people interact and see the world through culture maybe might be skewed. And given that we live in an interconnected world where actually we're dealing with different cultures and different people in different contexts all the time, maybe we're talking past each other. And so what do I mean by weird? Whoops, that's wrong way around. But basically, we talk here in the West about our achievements, and so we focus on this rather than our relationships and our values. We tend to be more individualistic and self-interested versus collectivist and caring about others' interests. And we prioritize impersonal transactional cooperation. So we transact a lot with strangers all over the world. It allows us to consume and produce stuff, but at the expense of developing personal, local, meaningful relationships. So there's two groups of people. There's people that see life as maybe a series of transactions, and there's others which see it as an opportunity to build deep relationships. So being able to transact with people all around the world has created a lot of wealth and power, but at what cost? We've lost a lot of community, we've lost a lot of local relationships. So then if we were to flip this to this new game, where actually how do we survive and thrive in an uncertain world? So this next game, what do we need to try and tweak? Do we need more impersonal transactional relationships with strangers the other side of the world? Or do we need to get better at understanding our neighbours, our colleagues, the people around us? And so there's trade-offs to be had here. We can't do all of both. But I think the pandemic has revealed actually we need relationships. It's revealed what's important to us. And so then the other thing is we tend to be analytical thinkers here in the West versus holistic thinkers. So what does that look like? So a study in 2001 basically showed a series of images to Japanese and American citizens, same pictures, different descriptions. So culture really filters out how we think about the world. So here, the Americans would typically talk about the fish, the color, the size, in other words, the objects. The Japanese would tend to talk about the overall context, the scene, the setting, the big picture, if you like, and how everything relates. So the Japanese and, Asian and a lot of different cultures tend to see interdependencies and tend to start with the big picture, whereas we tend to think about the parts so we can isolate them from context and analyze them. So very, very different views of the world. So provocation number 3. So you could be missing out on tomorrow's talent because people don't want to be pigeonholed into narrow specialisms anymore. So I think that a lesson from the pandemic is that actually it strips away all of the things which were artificial and meaningless to reveal actually what was really important. So actually what was really important, have a think about what lessons did you take from the pandemic? Some people would say it was health, relationships, fun, time in nature, freedom, security. These aren't artificial things. These are kind of real feel. These are things which we feel and experience. But we've been bogged down in reports and meetings about meetings. We're a society addicted to paperwork, but we can choose not to be, because actually this doesn't really help us. This didn't really help us during the pandemic, and actually flipping to the 21st century game, surviving and thriving. Does paperwork help us survive and thrive? Does it help us adapt? Does it help us develop the skills which we need to adapt to new environments, or does it hinder us? And so I think in many ways we've confused the board with the actual game of life itself. We see the world through all of these different kind of procedures and processes and systems and inboxes of just stuff, that we've become almost like a culture where all we do is pull levers and press buttons, but we don't actually play the real game of life, real work itself. So it's kind of getting in the way. And so why does this matter? It matters, not just because it's stunting us, but actually we spend all of our time on complex or complicated systems, on lawyers, on contracts, on accountants to manage all of this. So it's hugely expensive, and that doesn't actually really create a huge amount of value. And so it stunts people, it's costly, and our resources aren't plentiful. So actually we've got to be a lot more efficient with what we do. So I think that what we've ended up kind of creating is basically all of these kind of silos and abstract categories, all of this analysis that we've done, and we've created all these kind of specialisms, and we've lost sight of the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is the customer, the problems, it's life, it's how do we kind of live better? How do we serve our customers better? How do we actually develop as individuals better? And for me, perhaps it's doing the opposite to what we've been doing, that actually maybe we need to kind of simplify and declutter, and actually just really focus on what's real and what's meaningful. So provocation number 4 sounds pretty obvious, but I think that we confuse this. I think that you could be missing out on tomorrow's talent because people are looking for engaging work, which is meaningful and purposeful. And they're not going to get that if we treat them like machines. And I think that, have a think about this as a question. Are you more worried about machines becoming human-like, or are you more worried about us becoming more machine-like? For me, it's the latter. And we've outsourced a hell of a lot of our responsibilities to machines, but that comes with trade-offs. We become increasingly passive. We become spectators, and becoming disengaged, and we lose our intentionality to actually do stuff because we just give authority away to technology, and we become less responsible. We just think, well, actually, it's not our problem. It's actually the kind of machine's problem, and actually, that's not great either. We become increasingly ignorant to what we're outsourcing and its impact elsewhere. We just become detached and disengaged, and we have this diminished independence. And so then, if you think about overlaying that onto the new game of surviving and thriving, is that where we want to be, or is that the exact opposite of where we want to be? So we need both players and machines, but we need to understand that we're different, and trying to redraw this line between us is incredibly important. I think what machines can do is basically handle the 20th century game, the game of more transactions, of scale, more data, more everything. Humans don't do scale well. But machines are programmable. They are not adaptive. They're not versatile. They're not flexible. They're developed in kind learning environments, but the environments of the future are going to be very, very novel, very different. And humans are versatile, they're resilient, they're conscious, and have multiple intelligences, which we don't get to show because we're constantly having to man machines. And so I see the kind of future is, it's not either or. It's actually, how do we work together? But actually, technology should be supporting us. We shouldn't be manning technology. I think we've got the wrong way around. And it's that kind of renegade approach. Do we need to just flip this and actually ask, how can technology help us be better humans? And so the fifth provocation is we need to embrace diverse players. We have a culture of focusing on our weaknesses, trying to correct what's wrong with us. But the things which are wrong with us, maybe it's just because we're not machines. We can basically be slightly disorganized, or perhaps have poor time management. I know that because I have ADHD. But I can also do those things well. But it's when my life becomes only about managing time, only about managing an inbox, only looking at my life through a calendar, that it becomes problematic. So there's a balance to be had. And things which are bad can be good in other contexts. No human trait is universally good or bad. So how about if we swap to our strengths? Things which machines are less good at: our creativity, our flexibility, our ability to hyper-focus. And impulsivity, I just use as an example, it can be good and it can be bad. It can be trained to be good instinct, good intuition. We get stuck over analyzing things and we don't get things done, whereas impulsivity is important for entrepreneurial ideas. And so we kind of need to think about, actually, what do people bring to the table? Not just think, actually, how can we correct the weaknesses or perceived weaknesses that we see? And so if we're embracing diverse players, and this is really about diverse thinking, how do we prioritize the spaces which create diverse ideas? And for me, thinking differently at a screen just doesn't work for me. And so my ideas come from being in the shower, or washing the car, or walking, or traveling. So actually, how do we create the spaces and environments for us to have these new ideas? So maybe one thing is to encourage your staff to have more showers, as a tongue-in-cheek thing. And so just a quick recap of the brain, because we talked about perspectives, and I'm interested in the brain because of ADHD. But also just because everything goes through our brain, and we have two hemispheres, but why do we have two hemispheres? Why is the brain divided in the first place? So we know that the left hemisphere controls the right side, but we also know it's smaller, lighter, has more grey matter, has specialized processing, and has different neurochemicals compared to the right, which controls the left side. It's different sizes. So basically, they're different anatomically in every respect. So why is that? And so if you think about the left hemisphere, it controls our right hand. 90% of us write with the right hand, and so it's kind of it's focused on very precise ability to grasp and manipulate. And so if we think about how we evolved, we evolved in the savannah to basically both kill prey and actually avoid being eaten by prey. And that requires two different types of attention. So thinking about attention deficit disorder, there isn't one type. So one deficit means a surplus elsewhere. We need a very fixed, narrow way of attending to killing something, but we also need a broad, open, flexible, sustained way of not being eaten by predators. So we have these complementary but contrasting ways of attending to the world. And everything that we do is either in balance or sometimes conflicting. And so the left hemisphere helps us use and manipulate the world for our own benefit. It's all about utility. What can we use? How can we get more of it? It has an active problem-solving, fixing mindset. It prefers the non-living, mechanical world. It prefers imperfections, formality. It works top-down. And a lot of what we do in our brain is a reflection of what's going on in our workplaces and society. It's quite rigid and inflexible. It works in categories and the familiar, and it's a very binary yes or no thinker. So we've codified the world in ones and zeros because it thinks in ones and zeros, and the world isn't ones and zeros. But the right is more about understanding and meaning. It's more subtle, more nuanced, more flexible. But we need to give it space to do its thing. It understands context. It understands empathy. And the thing about empathy and problem solving, one inhibits the other. So the left and right hemisphere both work in tandem, but also inhibit each other. And so empathy in the right hemisphere inhibits the left hemisphere's problem solving mindset. And so there's different ways of attending to the world which shut off different parts of the hemispheres. And so the right hemisphere is more about the living, the personal. It's flexible, working bottom up from the body. It appreciates new and unique relationships and the space in between ones and zeros. So innovation, if you think about how this might work. So innovation, the best ideas, the most creative, more broad ideas will come from the right hemisphere. We will then pass it to the left hemisphere for the kind of the action, the execution, if you like. So the kind of process and procedures and refinement before it then goes back into the right hemisphere to be integrated before it's delivered back out into the real world to understand the broader implications of innovation. But where are we going wrong? And Einstein was onto it that actually, maybe we've created the world in the eyes of our rational mind, and our rational mind is only a small percentage of reality. So our right hemisphere seems to be better at understanding the big picture, the actual reality, whereas the left hemisphere is better at getting us between point A and B. So the right is better for seeing the future. The left is really the means for us to get there. But we've created a world where the means has become the ends as well. So a quick bit about the kind of production line of life. And we've created an interview process, and the whole of life has become like an assembly line. The assembly line and it's basically engulfed us. And Thomas Edison, the inventor of the light bulb, came up with the idea of the interview from the 1920s. And so he invented it, and this legacy still lives on. We also invented the scientific management of people in around the same time, and in compensation for alienating work, what we did was through Henry Ford, we created job security, health, good pension, union protection, increased prosperity, and more leisure time, which is great. But actually what's happened since then is that we've lost all of those, but we've still got this production line where we're just pushing more and more people through it. We need to move on. Times have changed. So back in the 1920s, it was okay for babies and doctors to sell us cigarettes, but things have changed. So audition really is what we call a social product. It's a way for shaping what comes next. I won't go into too much details about it because information is available on our stand, but it's just trying to see, reframe the interview as something like a stage. So getting rid of the interview process and the CV. Actually, how do we create experiences and space for young people, diverse people to come in and try different roles and basically participate in learning about your business in a way which isn't adversarial, which isn't so performative, which isn't so kind of structured, because what we've got at the moment just doesn't work. And so what could this mean for Essex? So one final word for Essex, and I think it's been a great event, and thanks for putting it on, and thanks to my friend Mark at Chuffed, a local agency who's giving young people opportunities to perform on the stage. Really exciting, creative agency. I really like what they do and their approach. And so, what can we be as a region? And I'm from the region, and I think that we shouldn't follow other regions, other cultures, but we should basically take little pieces of what every culture, every business, every region is doing and make it our own. We need to try things. We need to embrace difference. We need to be prepared to fail and be prepared to just do things our way. And I think I would like to be part of something which is called the Experimental East, which is just basically open for exploring how do we survive and thrive together in the 21st century, and basically create this patchwork of ideas and new players and new games and new cultural framing to create what comes next. So I'm conscious I've overrun a little bit, but thank you for listening. Any questions? Thank you. Thank you very much for your help. Take care.